My fiancée smashed my car window with a rock while shouting that she slept with her boss to get even. My name is Caleb. I'm 31 years old, and up until a few months ago, I thought I had everything lined up for a stable, respectable life. A good job in logistics at a mid-sized company, a modest but reliable car I had worked hard to pay off, and an engagement to Marissa, a woman I believed was my partner in building a future. We had a date for the wedding, we had a small joint savings account set aside for the ceremony, and we were even looking at starter homes in nearby neighborhoods. At least, that's what I thought. The first crack in the illusion didn't come quietly. It wasn't a hushed conversation, an overheard whisper, or a private confession. It came in the form of a loud crash of glass, a scream that echoed down the street, and a confession so blunt and vile it seared itself into the minds of everyone present. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in early spring. I had just gotten off a shift and parked my car in front of our apartment building. But parking was tight, and the spot directly in front of the entrance was taken by another resident, so I slid into a spot across the street. I grabbed some groceries, headed upstairs, and thought little of it. 2 hours later, I was in the living room watching highlights from last night's game when I heard shouting outside. Not just any shouting, a woman's voice shrill with rage, each word spat with venom. At first, I thought it was one of the usual neighborly disputes. In our building, people argued over noise, parking, or whose dog made a mess in the hallway. But then I caught the words. "You think you're so perfect, Caleb? You think you can control me?" Well, I slept with my boss. I slept with him to get even. The grocery bag still sat on the kitchen counter, half unpacked. I dropped the cereal box I was holding and ran to the window. There she was, Marissa, my fiancée, the woman I'd promised to marry. She was standing in the street in broad daylight, wild-eyed, her cheeks flushed crimson, holding a rock the size of a grapefruit in her hand. And at her feet, shards of glass scattered across the pavement like ice. She had smashed the window of a black sedan. Not my car. I blinked hard, trying to process what I was looking at. My car, a blue midsize hatchback, was parked opposite, untouched. She had mistaken this car for mine and hurled the rock straight through the rear passenger window. And she didn't even notice. Neighbors poked their heads out of windows. A family walking their dog stopped dead in their tracks. A group of Marissa's co-workers, I recognized them faintly from a holiday party, stood frozen at the end of the block, their mouths open in shock. And Marissa kept going. She kicked at the door, screaming at the shattered glass as if it were me. She shouted about how she had given everything to this relationship, how I was boring and weak, how she had options. And then she screamed the same confession again, louder this time, so no one could possibly mishear it. She had slept with her boss. I couldn't move at first. My body felt like it was split in two, one half wanting to rush out there, demand answers, and drag her back inside before she embarrassed herself further. The other half wanted to sink through the floor, disappear, and never face the weight of those words. But then I noticed something. She wasn't even looking around. She was too wrapped up in her tantrum, too obsessed with the drama of the moment to realize the car wasn't mine. And that realization hit me harder than anything else. She had prepared herself to destroy something of mine. She had armed herself with that rock, with those words, with that fury. And she had been ready to cause as much damage as possible. The fact that she picked the wrong target didn't matter. The intention was clear. I took a deep breath, grabbed my keys, and walked out of the apartment building. The air was thick with tension. People stared as I crossed the street, some whispering, others pulling out their phones. Marissa froze when she finally spotted me. For a split second, her face twisted in confusion. Her eyes darted from me to the car she had just destroyed. I could almost see the realization dawning on her that she had smashed the wrong window. And then her expression hardened into defiance. She opened her mouth, maybe to justify herself, maybe to twist the story into another attack on me. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask her why. I didn't demand details. I just walked past her, unlocked my car, my actual car, and slid into the driver's seat. The silence that fell over the crowd was deafening. People gasped. Someone muttered, "Oh my God, it wasn't even his car." Another voice laughed nervously. I started the engine, pulled away from the curb, and drove off without a word. In the rearview mirror, I saw Marissa standing there, rock still in her hand, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't believe what had just happened. My heart pounded as I turned down the next street. My hands shook against the steering wheel. My entire body buzzed with the aftershock of humiliation, betrayal, and disbelief. But underneath the chaos of emotions, there was something else, a strange, icy clarity. She had confessed, publicly, loudly, to dozens of witnesses. She had revealed everything without me lifting a finger, and she had thought she was punishing me. I pulled into a parking lot a few blocks away and sat there for nearly an hour, watching people come and go while my thoughts spun. Each memory of the last year replayed in my mind like broken film. The late nights, she said she was working late. The sudden new clothes she claimed were on sale. The distance that had crept in between us when I asked about wedding planning. It all made sense now. By the time I drove back home that evening, the street was empty. The damaged car had been taped over with plastic, and the rock was gone. So was Marissa. She didn't come home that night. I sat alone in our apartment, staring at the faint outlines of our life together, framed photos, unopened wedding invitations, the dress bag hanging in the closet. But they felt like props in a play that had ended abruptly, the actors gone, the stage abandoned. I didn't sleep much. I didn't cry either. My mind wasn't in mourning. It was already moving forward, piecing together what this meant, what I had to do next. Because this wasn't just a betrayal. It wasn't just infidelity. It was war declared in broad daylight. And if she thought smashing a stranger's car window and screaming about her affair would be the end of it, she had no idea what was coming. The morning after the spectacle on the street, I woke up to silence. The other side of the bed was empty, the sheets still neatly tucked, as if no one had touched them. Marissa hadn't come home. For a moment, I half expected her to burst through the door with some excuse, spinning the night into a misunderstanding, blaming alcohol, or trying to gaslight me into believing I had misheard her. But the apartment stayed quiet, heavy with the weight of reality. I moved through the room slowly, studying the little reminders of our life together. Her makeup scattered across the bathroom counter, her shoes tossed by the door, the mug she always used for morning coffee left unwashed in the sink. To anyone else, it might have looked like normal clutter. To me, it was evidence of a life built on lies. I wasn't sure if she would return, but one thing became clear. I couldn't just sit and wait for her explanation. She had already confessed in front of the whole neighborhood. Her words weren't just out in the open. They were permanently imprinted in the memory of everyone who had been there. Even if she came home with apologies, the damage was irreparable. As I sat at the table, sipping cold coffee, I realized I didn't want her excuses. I wanted the truth. And the truth wasn't going to come from her mouth. That day, I began piecing together the fragments. I started with our finances. We had opened a joint account a year ago when we got engaged, contributing regularly to save for the wedding. I wasn't obsessive about monitoring every transaction, but I checked in occasionally. What I found this time made my stomach twist. The balance was much lower than it should have been. Thousands had disappeared, not in one big withdrawal, but in small, frequent ones spread across months. The transfers weren't marked as wedding-related. No deposits to caterers, no payments to florists, no receipts for venues. Instead, the trail led to vague payments listed under personal expenses, clothing boutiques, and online services I had never heard of. The more I dug, the worse it got. She had told me her boss had been helping her at work, mentoring her toward a promotion. What I discovered through snippets of overheard conversations and the way her coworkers looked at me during office gatherings painted a different picture. He wasn't mentoring her. He was using her. His name was Gerald. He was older, polished, the kind of man who wore suits even on casual Fridays. Married, with children old enough to be in college. At company events, he always played the role of a respectable family man, smiling politely at my handshake, offering me drinks while keeping his hand just a little too long on Marissa's shoulder. At the time, I dismissed it as office familiarity. Now I knew better. Gerald had been dangling promises in front of Marissa. Promotions, raises, better positions. But those promises were never real. He kept her chasing them, doing favors, covering tasks, even taking the fall for his mistakes in reports. In return, she got dinners, jewelry, and whispered lies about a future that would never happen. And in her desperation, she had siphoned money from our account to maintain the illusion of being independent, pretending the new clothes and luxuries came from her own success rather than from his manipulations. The picture was coming into focus, and it was uglier than I expected. Marissa wasn't just unfaithful. She was reckless, short-sighted, and sinking deeper into a hole she didn't even recognize. I didn't act immediately. I knew enough about myself to understand that rage could ruin everything if I let it drive me. Instead, I stepped back and thought. She wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel small, to shatter my dignity in public. But she hadn't realized something important. When you scream your betrayal in front of witnesses, you don't just burn the person you're targeting. You burn yourself. The neighbors had seen it. Her coworkers had heard it. Even strangers had recorded it. That confession was no longer mine to hide or hers to twist. It was part of the street's memory. Days passed without her coming home. I didn't call. I didn't text. Instead, I quietly collected more pieces of the puzzle. I went through the shared laptop. She wasn't careful with her logins, and in her arrogance, she had left emails and messages open. What I found confirmed my suspicions. Messages between her and Gerald weren't poetic or affectionate. They were transactional. She complained about me, called me a bore, said I lacked ambition. He responded with flattery, just enough to keep her on the hook, always circling back to tasks at work she could do for him. Occasionally, there were references to hotel rooms, excuses about working late, and once, a brazen note where he mentioned her taking money from me. Reading those messages, I didn't feel heartbreak anymore. I felt something colder, calculated. Every line was another nail in the coffin of the person I thought I knew. She wasn't just cheating. She was collaborating in her own destruction. When Marissa finally returned, it wasn't with shame. She walked into the apartment as if nothing had happened. No apology, no trembling voice. She acted casual, moving through the rooms, tossing her bag onto the couch, and checking her phone. If she noticed my silence, she didn't acknowledge it. That night, she slept in our bed without a word. I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her steady breathing. And I understood something critical. She thought she still had control. She believed I was too weak to act, too invested to walk away. She thought smashing a car window and screaming her betrayal had been a temporary outburst, something that could be patched over with excuses later. But she was wrong. I didn't confront her. I didn't bring up the emails or the bank account. I didn't ask her about Gerald. Instead, I let her believe I was paralyzed, waiting, unsure. Because the more she thought I was blind, the deeper she would dig her own grave. Over the next week, she resumed her routine. Late nights at work, secretive phone calls in the bathroom, new clothes arriving at the apartment without tags or receipts. But I noticed something else. Tension. Her confidence had cracks. When the phone rang, she hesitated before answering. When she left the apartment, she looked over her shoulder. I realized then that Gerald wasn't as solid as she believed. His wife, Catherine, was sharp, observant, and increasingly suspicious. I remembered her at the company dinner last year, watching the room with quiet intensity while Gerald charmed investors. She wasn't the kind of woman who ignored details. If she hadn't seen the affair yet, she would soon. And when she did, she wouldn't keep it quiet. I had no intention of helping Marissa or Gerald cover their tracks. In fact, I wanted the opposite. I wanted the truth to break loose at the worst possible moment for both of them. So I started to prepare. Not with revenge fantasies or outbursts of anger, but with patience. I documented everything quietly. The bank withdrawals, the emails, the receipts. I saved copies in hidden folders, stored backups in places she would never check. And all the while, I let her live in the illusion. I let her think she was winning, that I was powerless, that she could continue building her house of cards higher and higher. But deep down, I knew exactly what would happen when the wind finally blew. By the second week, Marissa's confidence had morphed into arrogance. She strutted around the apartment like a victor returning from battle, wearing new clothes, new jewelry, carrying handbags I knew she couldn't have afforded on her salary. She didn't bother hiding them anymore. She must have assumed that I either wasn't paying attention or was too defeated to challenge her. She began leaving receipts in the trash, perfume bottles on the dresser, expensive wine bottles in the kitchen. The message was clear. She wanted me to see how well she was doing without me, even while she lived under the same roof. The humiliation on the street hadn't been enough for her. She needed to press harder, to make me feel the imbalance of power. But I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I played the role she expected, the silent, docile man too stunned to react. She mistook my restraint for weakness, and in that miscalculation, she gave me exactly what I needed: time. I knew the moment to act wouldn't come from me alone. It had to come from a shift in the balance, an event neither she nor Gerald could control. That moment arrived when I overheard a conversation between her and one of her co-workers in the lobby of our building. They didn't see me lingering by the mailboxes. The co-worker's tone was nervous, almost pleading. She mentioned an upcoming company dinner, some kind of recognition event with spouses invited. Gerald would be there. So would Catherine. And so would Marissa. The co-worker asked if Marissa was sure about attending, if it wasn't too risky. Marissa laughed in response, her voice dripping with confidence, saying Gerald had it under control. That dinner became my focus. It was the perfect stage. A room full of executives, colleagues, and Gerald's wife. All the people whose opinions mattered most to both of them. If the truth came out there, it would be catastrophic. Over the next few days, I refined my plan. I didn't want to make a scene myself. That would make me look bitter, vengeful, and unhinged. No, the key was to set the stage so that they exposed themselves. All I needed to do was pull the right threads and watch their carefully constructed facade collapse. The night of the dinner arrived. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be inside. I had already delivered what needed to be delivered earlier that afternoon. I had compiled a neat package. Copies of emails, transaction records from our joint account, and photographs I had discreetly taken of Marissa slipping into hotels at odd hours. The envelope bore no signature, no hint of my involvement. It was addressed directly to Catherine. I left it with a trusted courier who specialized in discreet deliveries. By 7 o'clock, the guests were gathered in a glittering hotel ballroom across town. Through quiet channels, a friend who worked at the hotel, I knew the evening schedule. Drinks, speeches, dinner, recognition awards. It was all meticulously planned, as corporate events usually were. What wasn't planned was Catherine opening the envelope just as the speeches were beginning. I wasn't there, but later I heard how it unfolded. Catherine sat at the table, elegant as ever, with Gerald on one side and Marissa nearby, glowing in a designer dress she could never have purchased on her own. Catherine read the document slowly, her expression never breaking. When Gerald raised his glass for a toast, she set the papers down, folded them carefully, and looked across the table at Marissa. Silence followed. Not the silence of respect or anticipation, but the kind that swallows a room whole, leaving everyone waiting for the drop. Gerald's voice faltered. Marissa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Catherine spoke only a few words, but they were enough. She pushed the envelope across the table, directly toward Gerald. When he opened it, his face drained of color. The dam had burst. Conversation stopped. Forks hovered midair. In that single moment, the affair was no longer rumor, no longer whispered suspicion. It was documented, undeniable, laid bare in front of colleagues and executives. Some guests excused themselves awkwardly. Others leaned in, hungry for scandal. The senior partners of the firm exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Gerald, usually so composed, sputtered as Catherine rose from the table with quiet dignity and walked out, leaving him and Marissa to face the fallout. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. By the time I heard about it the next morning, the damage had already spread. My phone buzzed with messages from mutual acquaintances, some pretending to be concerned, others eager to relay the gossip. Marissa returned home late that night, her face pale, her eyes bloodshot from stress or tears. She didn't try to hide where she had been. She went straight to the bedroom, stripped off her dress, and collapsed onto the bed without a word. I watched her from the doorway, not with pity, but with an almost clinical detachment. This was what she had built. This was the house of cards she had stacked so high, convinced it would never topple. And now, with one envelope, it had collapsed in front of the very people whose approval she craved most. The following days were chaos. Gerald was suddenly absent from work, replaced at meetings by nervous subordinates. Catherine filed for separation almost immediately. Rumors spread through the office like wildfire, and Marissa was at the center of them all. She had become radioactive. At home, she tried to act as if nothing had changed. She cooked dinner, asked perfunctory questions about my day, even tried to sit close to me on the couch. But the tension in her eyes betrayed her. She knew the walls were closing in, and she didn't know how much I knew. What she didn't realize was that her downfall had only just begun. The dinner had been the turning point, the exposure. But karma doesn't settle with humiliation alone. Consequences have layers, and hers were waiting just around the corner. One evening, I returned from work to find her pacing the living room, phone clutched in her hand. She muttered under her breath, rehearsing excuses, trying to summon confidence that no longer came naturally to her. When she noticed me, she forced a smile, but it cracked at the edges. She thought she could manage the fallout, spin it into something survivable. She didn't yet grasp that Gerald was abandoning her, that she was nothing more than collateral damage to him. And I wasn't about to correct her misunderstanding. For years, I had thought of myself as the steady one in our relationship, patient, dependable, calm under pressure. Those qualities had often made me feel ordinary, overshadowed by Marissa's fire and ambition. But now, they were my weapons. While she flailed, desperate to regain control, I waited. I observed, and I prepared the final stage. Her downfall in front of colleagues had been satisfying. Yes, but it was only the beginning. She had humiliated me in public, shouted her betrayal in the street, and tried to shatter my dignity. Now, she would feel the weight of everything she had taken, not just from me, but from everyone around her. The stage was set. All that remained was the last, crushing act. After the company dinner fiasco, the days that followed unfolded like slow-motion wreckage. Gerald disappeared from the office entirely, rumors swirling about an internal investigation. Catherine filed paperwork so swiftly it was clear she had been preparing for this moment long before the envelope arrived. And Marissa, once so smug and untouchable, had become a ghost of herself. At first, she tried to salvage her image. She posted photos online, pretending nothing was wrong. Filtered shots of her meals, staged selfies, captions about fresh starts and new opportunities. But the comments betrayed her. Friends whispered questions, coworkers left curt replies, and some people didn't bother hiding their scorn. Screenshots circulated, mockery piled up. In the apartment, her composure cracked further each day. She spent long hours staring at her phone, waiting for Gerald to call, to text, to reassure her. He never did. His silence was absolute. The man she had gambled everything on had abandoned her without hesitation. She turned her attention to me. At first, cautiously, small talk in the kitchen, asking how my day was, cooking dinners like nothing had happened. Then, more directly, she told me she had been under stress, that Gerald had pressured her, that it hadn't meant anything. She cried in the hallway, clutching at my arm as if tears could erase the memory of her screaming in the street with a rock in her hand. But the thing about crocodile tears is they don't move you when you've already seen the truth. I let her speak. I let her grovel. I let her believe there was still a chance. And in doing so, I bought myself more time to set the final piece in motion. Because there was still one detail she hadn't realized. The car she had smashed that day in front of our apartment, it wasn't mine. It belonged to a lawyer, a man meticulous about details, furious about damage, and determined to make her pay. At first, I hadn't interfered. The building's security cameras had caught everything. Marissa with the rock, her face twisted in rage, her voice loud enough to be heard from the street. The lawyer contacted the police, filed charges, and demanded restitution. Marissa, lost in her affair and her arrogance, hadn't even followed up. She assumed it would disappear, just another inconvenience swept aside. But I knew better, and I made sure the case kept moving forward. The summons arrived on a Thursday. She tore open the envelope at the kitchen table, her eyes darting across the legal language, her lips trembling as she realized what it meant. Vandalism charges, restitution demands, court appearances. She crumpled the paper in her fists, then glanced at me as if I might save her. The irony almost made me laugh. She had betrayed me, humiliated me, stolen from me, and now she expected me to protect her. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. From there, everything unraveled at once. Gerald cut ties completely. Without his backing, Marissa's standing at work collapsed. Gossip turned into isolation. Projects were reassigned. Invitations vanished. Within weeks, she was let go, the polite corporate term for being pushed out with no future prospects. The apartment grew heavier by the day. Marissa moved through it like a caged animal, snapping at small inconveniences, crying over emails, lashing out at me when I didn't react. She begged for sympathy, then accused me of being cold. She tried guilt, anger, seduction, silence, every tactic in the book. None of it worked. What she didn't realize was that her downfall wasn't just personal. It was financial too. When she drained our joint account for her luxuries, she thought she was being clever, hiding withdrawals under vague descriptions. But I had documented everything. I met with a financial advisor and then with a lawyer of my own. Together, we built a case showing the misappropriation of funds. Not only had she stolen from me, but she had also attempted to pass off wedding expenses that never existed. When I presented this to her, she broke down completely. She sat on the floor, clutching her knees, begging me not to press charges, not to make things worse. But things were already worse, because every decision she had made had consequences waiting to be paid. The night before her court appearance for the vandalism case, she finally snapped. She accused me of orchestrating everything, of setting her up, of being cruel. She screamed that I had ruined her life. The truth, of course, was the opposite. She had ruined her own life, brick by brick, decision by decision. All I had done was refuse to shield her from the fallout. When the day arrived, I stood outside the courthouse, watching her shuffle inside in borrowed clothes, her face pale and drawn. The same woman who once bragged about her options now looked like a ghost of herself. The lawyer whose car she had smashed was relentless. He pressed for maximum restitution, citing emotional distress, professional embarrassment, and the public nature of the incident. With the security footage as evidence, there was no escape. The court ruled against her swiftly, saddling her with heavy fines and mandatory community service. The humiliation was complete. In the weeks that followed, she packed her things slowly, moving them into boxes one by one. She didn't announce where she was going, but it didn't matter. Her world had shrunk to ashes. No fiancé, no job, no lover, no savings, and now legal debts on top of everything else. I sold the wedding reservations we had put deposits on. The venue, the photographer, even the honeymoon package. All of it went to other couples, and the profits went directly into my account. It felt poetic, watching the remnants of our supposed future turn into cash that belonged solely to me. When Marissa left for the last time, dragging her suitcase down the hall, she didn't look back. She couldn't. Pride wouldn't let her, and shame kept her eyes fixed on the ground. I closed the door behind her and felt, for the first time in months, the weight lift from the apartment. Neighbors still whispered about the night she smashed the wrong car. Coworkers still laughed behind her back about the company dinner. And Gerald? He quietly negotiated his exit from the firm, his reputation tarnished, his marriage in ruins. As for me, I moved forward. Slowly, deliberately, and with the clarity that only comes from surviving betrayal. I didn't rush into new relationships or chase distractions. Instead, I focused on rebuilding, not just finances, but dignity, confidence, and peace. Because revenge, I realized, isn't always about dramatic gestures or violent outbursts. Sometimes it's about patience, about letting people trap themselves in the holes they've dug, about stepping aside and allowing karma to finish what they started. Marissa had picked up the rock that day and hurled it with all her fury, convinced she was striking at me. Instead, she had struck at her own life, shattering everything she thought was unshakable. And I had simply walked away, into a future she would never be part of. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.